obviously we've also discussed there's been so much overlap between everything that, and everybody's different things, from breath work to connection and the overall, speaking of what are we doing here, what is the importance of these things. And two of the words that came up a lot were the words access and connection. I would say healing is one that maybe we haven't said as much, but is kind of like, you know, the purpose of any of this stuff is the idea of creating an autonomous and healthy environment of people. And I would say that the most healing thing that anybody can encounter is actually acceptance, is the word that I would bring forth to the forefront. And I'm sure you agree, Jim. I'm targeting you with my biases of these things. So, like when I'm thinking about, okay, so backing up a little bit. The way that you named this segment was super interesting. The implications of touch. And I was like, oh, okay, so it's fun to just say, and be like, it's very fancy, these things, implications of touch. But like, okay, so like, what does touch mean? I would argue that if we're speaking in terms of nutrients, again, tagging back onto what we were just talking about, that touch as a nutrient is probably the most underserved in modern times, from, you know, many origins that make sense, you know, from like Me Too movement type things of being afraid because the touch is unwanted and it's aggressive or in a way that you don't feel is safe, or all these things, or whatever, it's just what your parents grew up with. Their parents didn't hug them, and maybe they either went overboard in trying to make up for it with you, or they just didn't know how to and didn't know how. So I generally, personally, don't enjoy the idea of regulation and separating professionals from individuals very much. Of like, okay, you know, you go to a massage therapist to get a massage, but that massage therapist also can't touch your groin, can't do these things. There's so many like rules upon rules upon rules that constantly pull people away from their own bodies and their own connections to themselves, right? So one thing that I think is beautiful about the touch, or teaching people self-autonomy in terms of touch, is that it's the most accessible thing. Like, as long as you're not tied down, you can absolutely like touch yourself. And hopefully my goal is to have people touch each other more in ways that they feel good about, that they can do with their friends. So it doesn't become, I have to shell out $90 if I want to get a massage, right? Or isn't a thing. You look at families, or like you look at monkeys and apes and things like that, and there's constant touching things. I think about like everything in terms of energy or electricity or all these things. And I think one of the things that we get very much from touch is the healing benefits of sort of discharge of electricity, like, or sensing these things. That's what it feels like a lot. Like if you picture, you know, socks on a rug, right? Socks on the carpet, and you're rubbing around, and then you touching up, like there's a discharge and a connection when I touch the next person, or I touch a doorknob, it can be that or whatever, but there isn't like that feedback of things. So one of my theories about why touch is so important is that you like are sort of balancing your electrical discharges amongst a wider net of people, and you have that literal connection of things. And that becomes very healing. But so one of the discussions I've had with somebody that went to massage school, a friend of mine, about like why the need for regulation and the separation and things. And she brought up one of the best points that I've currently heard was that since it is such an alien and separated thing, to a lot of people now, that we're idiots, so to speak. Like and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, really, just that like both in the giving and the receiving of touch, we're idiots because we're inexperienced. Just like I'm an idiot going into any new thing, but it doesn't have to be I'm beating myself up about it. It's just like, oh, I just don't know because I'm inexperienced about it. And then you have the biopsychosocial stuff piled on upon it of like, bad touch, don't let anybody, that's your area, that stuff, like, and then the overriding of go hug your aunt, whether or not you wanted to or not. This bottle of autonomy, you are constantly taught forever and ever to override. What did you say?
He smells me and touches my butt.
You're constantly taught to override, and that goes to the seating thing and all these things, to override your internal tendencies. However, like one of the most important, actually, going back even more, I didn't think about this, one of the things I think about most on the subject of why don't people do things they want to do, why are we so like most people are so hell-bent on doing things they don't want to do, only things they've been taught to want, but don't have that intrinsic feel, also a lack of practice. I think goes back to kind of the westernized like lack of co-sleeping with babies. Like, why in any natural setting would it make sense to put a newborn or a baby that's too small to fend for itself in the dark by itself?
In a cage.
And the baby, they need to learn to self-soothe, right? That's the word that goes out. But it's like, okay, well, like, that's your first experience probably of feeling like something is very wrong with this situation, and you were taught to just deal with it. And taught, I just mean you're just left there like to cry, and then you're like, mom's like, oh, I'm over here and doing these things, right?
The baby has to turn itself off.
Yeah, and so there's a separation of self, right? And you're not a huge Gabor fan, but he talks about these things about that first initial traumas of stuff. And so like, okay, so like from that very beginning, and then it gets compounded, like hug your aunt, don't do this, sit still, all these things. So it just, any impulse you have to do things is like, wait, okay, so this thing, and then love is sort of the thing that's held hostage about all of it. Like I get love and I feel like my version of love and approval is gotten when I obey. So you get twisted into these situations. I'm like, okay, if I just stay like this, I will get love and approval from my parents in a way that I think I need, right? But there's one book I was reading recently was talking about. I believe it was World War II babies, some example of like taking war orphans and taking them outside of the cities to, again, I don't have a lot of details of this, but basically like taken outside of the cities and put in places where they were given good nutrition, like medical care, all these things. But the advent of apathy that occurred with the lack of touch. And they're like, okay, well, we've given all the nutrients. These children should survive, right? But thinking of touch as a nutrient, like there was a huge death rate, a huge mortality rate, there you go, among the babies, like that didn't have loving touch and like care from their mothers and like resting on top and skin to skin contact and all of these things. And you're just like, what is that X factor, right? Like we don't know what we're getting. Just like we don't totally know what we're getting from walking around barefoot all the time. Like we're getting more and more like, oh, like maybe these things. But how much of modern healing today is like, making it okay to do things that were totally natural to us. Like, whoa, if I drink water, what happens? My skin looks good? Okay, cool. Like if I walk on the ground outside, like there's an electromagnetic thing. We're just starting to get into all of these things and sort of giving people, and so that gets back to the idea of acceptance of like, okay, like what do you actually want to do? What actually feels right to you and what can you do about it moving forward? So what I'd like you to kind of meditate on for a moment, and I want to do a little like out loud about this too, is, well, first of all, like let's do an out loud part. I'd like to go around and just ask whether or not you consider yourself a touchy person, like a touchy-feely person. Do you like, hugging people or not? And let's just, go ahead and go. If you have something that you feel like you can sort out right now, like why or why not? You think that? Like, would you say you're a touchy-feely person, Brennan?
Yes, but I'm idiotic in some ways of understanding when people don't want it sometimes.
Okay.
Because I got things twisted, obligatory touch where you're like, I guess I'm supposed to do it now.
Mm-hmm. Saying you pretty much would say you are a touchy person.
Yes.
Why? What do you get out of it?
I feel an imprint of that person, like a real imprint in the memory, not just a figment.
That's beautiful. Okay, can you go any more into that?
Yeah, instead of just like, I have like this person is instead of a concept, they're like something that I have felt, like I've touched it.
Okay, so kinesthetic and touch is very important to you for
Yes.
making real.
Yes, for my learning, because I learn about them and I also learn about their current state. If I feel them very guarded, I'm like, that's a guarded person.
Mm-hmm.
Just treat them as such.
Yeah.
Or like a person who's like, give me a fucking hug. And I'm like, okay, we're going to probably be bumping into each other very often.
Yeah.
Roughhousing and stuff.
You've gotten that like, okay, right? Like you've established some kind of rule. And sounds like mostly nonverbal. like you can tell from that person, like, oh, like this body language feels this way. And we will get into more of that in a minute. Would you consider yourself a touchy person?
I think to make the narrative a bit more interesting, like growing up, not so much. I feel like, because my parents are almost two polar personalities. Like my dad is very touchy-feely from Italy, likes to smother, likes to touch a lot, very Italian, basically. My mother, however, is the total opposite. Doesn't really like to hug a lot. Like would give the most awkward hugs I've ever felt in my life. It's like
Fingertips, air.
yeah. Oh my God, come here. Yeah, it's your birthday. So this is like my relationship with touch from an early age, I guess, right? So I think my perception of touch is very skewed as a result.
Me too.
It seems like a learned perception. Right?
Yeah, and it was also very different going from co-ed school to an all-girls school as well. I felt like it was actually at the all-girls school where like all the girls are just like hugging each other more, a little more friendly. And I was like, oh, I was just like, wow, people touch a lot here, just like in general to communicate. And I was like, oh wow, it's very, very different. I think now I would say, yeah, I do jiu-jitsu. Come on, you know this answer already.
No, seriously, I know people that do jiu-jitsu and lie and sweat on each other and all these things, and as soon as we're done training, they won't hug. They're like, and I'm like, wow, that is interesting.
I retract that statement.
I get, sure, it seems like that should be the case, but like.
I think it's because in jiu-jitsu for many people there's a disconnect, right? And it's all these pieces.
Impersonal.
Yeah. And for me, I've been working hard to like try and connect all these pieces, like, with me, myself as a human entity as well, and also from contact improvisation, this whole idea of having a non-verbal dialogue about understanding my partner better and stuff. But in general, yes.
What do you think you get out of it?
Deeper connection, like understanding whoever I'm with on a deeper level, like more so than I feel I would be able to sometimes, just from verbal communication. It's very easy to mask what we mean when we talk verbally. I feel like it's hard to mask certain things in a non-verbal context sometimes, you know, because like the body is your truth sometimes, like the kind of like this idea of emotional anatomy in a way, like I can feel the truth, rather I can't always hear the truth, I feel.
Gotcha, thank you. I also appreciate we're in a small enough group that I can have this talk individually with everybody. Because like, my original plan was to have like get into groups of 2s or 3s and like have the more intimate conversation. But for you, because some people are also guarded to even speak about these kinds of things. But Jim, would you mind going in? It doesn't.
It doesn't include everything, but I mean, I'm a touch therapist and I love it.
You're happy about it, yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I chose the profession because of my anxiety disorder, you know, and I could not function in a political setting, you know, without the guarantees of genuineness and connection that touch provided. And I could not function, you know. I was good at my work, but I couldn't handle it. It's hard for me to be around people I have a lot of social anxiety. I feel safe when I'm touched. I feel connected. I was having drinks with my sister and trying to talk about some really heavy stuff, and she reached over, and it's unusual. It's kind of like the first time she kept touching me. And that's what I remember. I just keep remembering that, you know. It was a good conversation and everything, but I just keep remembering when she touched me. You know, when I first came out, I would go to gay bars, utterly horrified. I'd literally close my eyes, and I just, you know, I'd literally go to the first guy at the bar, and if he would have it, I'd rub his back. You know, it's a gay bar, some sexual overtones, but then I'd just go down the row of seats and give anybody, and then, you know, and if I felt worried, I'd just go up to people and I'd say, oh, safety hug, and they'd know what I meant, and then I'd get a hug, you know. And so, for me, the touch grounds me out of my head. You know, I have a big head, and it grounds me out of my head into my body, and it's very reassuring. Yeah.
That's great.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I come from a primarily Cuban household. My family split up when I was 4. So there was some, my father was abusive. So touch had a number of contexts. And my family was always, like my mother's side of my family was always very nurturing. A lot of hugs, a lot of bringing you in close, kissy, all sorts of things. Which, I wasn't opposed to. They were very overbearing with it, like almost like where they like mess up your hair and like kiss you and squeeze the hell out of you. But then later on in life, I was like 7 or 8, my father would, he essentially introduced me to body work. He was introduced to it by his martial arts teacher and kind of spread it to his sons who were physical and active and wanted to show them like how to take care of themselves in some way and essentially how to take care of others. And that's kind of where my understanding of touch kind of took root, both in this nurturing context and this way to take care of others. When something there's love that you get to share through touch, and you can feel it, and there's a language in it. In the same way, you can tell there's like an authenticity to it, like was mentioned previously, that you can tell when somebody's being genuine. You can tell their motives, but then I feel like you can also express a lot with it too. And in my main position as an aquatics instructor, I have the opportunity to work with really young kids, and in like teaching them to swim, like touch is inevitable. Like I have to hold them, I have to adjust them, I have to move them. It has to be nurturing, or it has to be firm, or it has to be stiff. So it's for me, it's an abundant way to communicate. But when you do it with the right intentions, it's something that elevates people or lifts them up. It shows them you care, and that's kind of what it has been and still is for me today.
So would you say you're a touchy person?
I'm a very touchy person.
Gotcha.
To myself, to others, emotionally, I match up with touchy. I think just the same too. But physically, I hug people, and I'm the person who like gets like the tap out hug. Like I'm like I mean it, and like I hug you like I mean it, and then everybody's like they hug and they're like, oh, okay, I'm done.
I don't know what to do with this love.
Studies have shown that a 5-minute hug is superior.
So, several of you have kind of touched already on the like the discharge aspect of it, of like, oh, like I feel like a connection, like there's a like, oh, like this brings me out of here into a different sensory place and all these things. And cool, thanks, guys.
And I want to say, you're having done contact improv, you're not afraid of touch. You're not afraid of getting in close. And I was very hesitant. It's good.
I'm not.
The universe stalled. The universe stalled for you a little bit there. Yeah.
No, I'm not a touchy person, but I can morph into, if the person I'm interacting with, I can tell that I will never reject it. Like I will never make anyone feel bad. So I will play that role, right? And then like slowly, like I will be that person as long as they need me to be that person. Knowing that it's like, again.
If you could come up with something to say, like a why not, do you have any idea what you would say?
I think just that general idea of being open, right? Like, I feel you can really only get hurt from the inside. So by being open and having someone that close, and again, it's never, I don't have this thing where it happened to me, and I feel regretful of that, but it's, I do feel like it will only be reciprocated and not, what's the right word? Provoked, because if it's provoked, it can be rejected. And so if it's never provoked, then there's...
Oh, do you mean by provoked? Like if someone's
like if you want to, and you can tell they're not into it, and you're like, oh, okay. But if you never initiate, then it's never rejection. You can only like go in a positive direction.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
That's brilliant. Thank you. Anything else?
no, I mean, I guess I should. I do remember, and I've told this story before. I don't know if I've told this group, but I have a memory, and I don't necessarily think this was like the switch, but it might have. It was like the cap to like lock it down. But I have this distinct memory of being like 5 or so, and like going to hug my mom and her being like, "Get off of me!" Like I could see her as a 5-year-old, her just being so stressed and just like, "Kids, get away from me!" But then I remember being like, "God."
Oh,
And then
yeah.
So and again, like
Yep.
like this lady feeds me. Like don't upset her. Like honestly, it's like don't
Yeah.
upset her,
Yeah.
and not wanting to upset anyone.
And for whatever
So-
reason, that moment
Yeah.
stuck more than any hugs that had ever happened before.
Right.
You know, like
there's many
right?
stories
Sure.
of like nope, like, or not wanting it and just
Yeah.
like going under the table to avoid it and just being like on the other side, like now there's a table between it. So, but yeah, I just think the vulnerability of it, even though again, like I'm reasonably sized and I don't think like I'm never afraid. Like I can walk down like the streets of Chicago and be like, "Oh, this is the wrong neighborhood," and then just be like, "Hey guys," and then being like, "What are you doing here?" But I've never really felt afraid, and I wonder if I've never really felt afraid because I've never felt like open enough to be, right? Like there's this, I can put on a shell that protects me, that doesn't like, that doesn't intimidate the other. Like I know exactly what like mask to put on, I guess, to
Okay.
keep the separation and keep the peace. So,
I
Can I
know,
ask a question to you?
I think so.
I wonder if, I mean, it's intrusive, you know, so you don't have to answer, but I mean, I wonder, do you feel like you might be very sensitive?
I think I'm extremely sensitive. Like, I think a lot of us are, but like there's, and it probably is a bit of controlling the sensitivity,
Yeah.
right? It's like, again, the moat, like there's hearts and flowers and puppies right along the moat's entrance. It's like, come on in, and then it's like, "Ooh," and this is so gentle, and there's puppies there. So you're just
Yeah.
like, great, this place is amazing, and then I keep the moat stays, the bubble stays.
Yeah.
But I think it's certainly a sensitivity protection.
Yeah.
like what I'd like you to just reflect on for a minute or two in writing is that idea of the contextual thing, because even like you said, like, oh, sometimes you meet somebody and they're like, like that. Even that person probably that seems like extrovertedly about touch, right? Is probably, I'm sure it's not 100%. There's got to be situations in which they're not like into it, right? Even if they have a general kind of thing, and even. Man, it can get more nuanced than that. Even some people that are like broad stroke like that maybe aren't even connecting that deeply, you know, because they're just like, I did the thing, cool, I got it. Like, or maybe they are. Maybe it's the most genuine hug you ever got. Aubrey Marcus has described the guy that wrote the 4 Agreements, Miguel Don Ruiz, as his hug being like, you know, when you just met him, he's like, it's like your grandfather you haven't seen in 70 years, and it's like the most famous. You're just like, oh my God, like, and every time he sees you, it's just like that. And he's like, I aspire, like, I want to be like that genuine, these kinds of things. So can you just write down, like, what conditions have to be in play for you? Like, so just reflect on that for a minute, and whether or not we share or not. I think we probably will, because this group's pretty in. Like, what are the conditions in which you want to engage in touch? Like, what's your ideal? Or maybe not even necessarily your ideal.